good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you are in. And thank you for joining us today at this webinar. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. Okay, my name is Yvonne. I'm taking care of standards and process in TAPA APAC, and I'll be your host for this webinar. And today's webinar is brought to you by TAPA APAC. And for those who are not so familiar with TAPA APAC, so TAPA APAC stands for Transported Asset Protection Association Asia Pacific. So such a long word, but just remember that TAPA APAC. Yeah, so that will be easier for you to remember. Right now, TAPA APAC has been already established for 25 years, and we are a leading industry association with a key focus to build an ecosystem to help organizations from all walks of industries to build resilience and security in supply chain. And now, back to today's topic. Today's our webinar is going to talk about the key buzzword that is in the market right now, tariffs. So, and we are all very concerned about the impact. And therefore, with this tariffs impact, how is it also going to, how are we going to look into compliance aspects? So for this discussion topic today, we very privileged that we're going to have four very prominent and experienced speakers with us today. So allow me to just briefly introduce them. So we have Mr. Tony Lugg, the chairman of TAPA APAC, Mr. Martin Palmer and Ms. Maureen Cori. They are the founders of Supply Chain Compliance LLC. And Mr. Douglas Mackay is a trade and customs advisor for the company Big Four. I will give them some time to introduce themselves later on in their segments. So to get the ball rolling, allow me to welcome first Mr. Tony Lugg, the chairman of TAPA APAC, to tell us a little bit more about our association. So without further ado, over to you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. And thank you very much to our guest speakers for joining the webinar today. As Yvonne was explaining to you, TAPA is the Transported Asset Protection Association. We are 25 years old. We are represented in 3 regions across the world. That's US, EMEA, and APAC. TAPA APAC represents, obviously, the Asia Pacific region. We have 850 corporations across Asia Pacific. Globally, we have roughly around 300 members, mainly blue chip companies. So TAPA has a very structured process. So we have, I'll talk about the standards in a moment and why the standards are highly relevant to this webinar today. But we have a very structured audit process for those TAPA standards, which are recognized globally by government agencies. So here in Singapore, for instance, we are recognized by Singapore Customs, Singapore Airport Police, across the region, Australian government, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and more importantly, we're actually an NGO in China. We were one of the privileged organizations to actually achieve an NGO, and that's along with the same level as Red Cross and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So you can see there TAPA has a lot of recognition with government agencies. So over the years, we've structured our global standards such as that we have a learning management system where we train people across the region. So at the moment, we have actually trained over 2,000 people to actually audit inside their businesses. We also have a TAPA intelligence system. There is a webinar coming up soon, so please make sure you join that. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, in terms of standards that you see there, on the top line, you see I'll talk about risk assessment standards shortly. But TAPA has made a significant amount of investment, and this investment isn't done by academics. It's actually done by people who are actually working at ground level. So the standards have been put together over the years, and they go through revisions every 3 years. And as I mentioned, that's been put on by the subject matter experts within the business. And that's why TAPA standards actually work, and that's why how they can actually improve your supply chain and actually help you build zero failure. So we have warehousing, we have trucking, we have guarding. We just released the cybersecurity standards, and that's very apt to what we're going to talk about today. Pharmaceutical brand protection, again, that's another issue, because although we have tariffs, the smugglers will, and people that are counterfeiting products will have the same issue as everybody else. Scrap management and business continuity, which is also key today. All right, so let's talk first of all in terms of the risk assessment standard. I'm sure many of you here can are of the opinion that this was a foreseeable risk. The tariffs, when we saw Trump version 1 and we see Trump version 2, there is really no difference. The only difference this time is that maybe Trump has been more aggressive in his approach. And of course, we would look at some of the drivers, or Yvonne will go through some of those drivers in a moment. But if you look at the potential increased cost, that's going to mean that some high value products could be even more valuable now. And that's going to means that they could be more attractive to thieves. In terms of supply chain disruption going forward, there's going to be renegotiation of contracts, and that's going to lead to some vulnerabilities. We've already seen some articles in the press of where products have been dumped or products have been resold. We also have rumors in the market of where brokers are now being engaged to look at recreating a new certificate of origin. And of course, then obviously that puts pressure onto the logistics service providers. In terms of increased transit times, it does mean that there's going to be some gaps that maybe haven't been covered in previous risk assessments. And that's going to lead to obvious vulnerabilities, especially where cross-border logistics become more complex. And of course, there will be a time where these tariffs do get resolved. And of course, that's going to lead to a surge in orders. And of course, that will result in capacity issues, things of that nature. So this great team that's on the call today are going to talk about some of these issues. They're going to talk about some of these impacts. And then ultimately, if you look at the TAPA standards, and if you look at what happened during COVID, you'll see that cybersecurity issues will increase at the same time. And of course, those companies that haven't got plans in place for their BCP will also have issues. Remember, we saw that during COVID. We saw that during the recovery of COVID, and we saw that happening last year as well. So, my advice to you is to everyone on this webinar, and to those who listen to the replay, strongly consider dusting off your TAPA global standards. Reach out to the team for help and support, because going forward, you will definitely need them. Okay, let's go next slide, please. Don't forget to follow us on our LinkedIn page. So you can scan that one now. We will send this out afterwards, so we'll put it into the chat as well that you can scan it. Please follow us. I'm on LinkedIn as well, so follow me and follow the speakers and keep up to date with everything that's carrying on. So back over to Yvonne to hear from the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. So thanks for the introduction. So we now all know how TAPA APAC has a wide variety of regimes and programs to help our businesses, like all kinds of businesses. And also back to the topic of today's. I know maybe Joanna, you want to start with the next slide? Yes, because just now earlier on in the webinar, I did mention about the key buzzword, tariffs. So, and we all know that with the recent tariffs announcement by the US, the resulting ripples it has created in the industry, in the market, is humongous. Of course, there are some who are still concerned, but then nonetheless, but not too sure what exactly is going to, how or what is going to impact themselves. But of course, to set the stage, we over here try to tell all of you that, why is a very short one. Why is the US introducing these tariffs? well, from what has been reported and what we are seeing in the reports is that for a variety of reasons, whereby aside from generating revenue, but of course, the Trump administration has also been saying that they would like that right now to curb unfair trade practices and also to reduce reliance on the current supply chain from certain countries. Well, also to bring back the US manufacturing, which is his biggest mandate that he's trying to push. And so for the first part, we shall invite Martin and Maureen, the founders of Supply Chain Compliance, to share the first part of the discussion today. And allow me to share this a little bit about Martin. Martin, he is a recognized authority in international trade compliance. And he has under his belt over 40 years of experience in distribution and logistics. And his specialization is in regulatory compliance, risk management, and supply chain security. And he also actively collaborates with NGOs and government agencies to combat illicit trade, counter proliferation, and wildlife trafficking across global supply chain. Very interesting profile, right? So do be encouraged to connect with him on LinkedIn subsequently after this webinar. Whereas for Maureen, she is a dynamic entrepreneur and a US licensed custom house broker. She serves as a vital bridge between industry and government, and she lobbies a lot for efforts in customs, homeland security, and aviation security. So, with many years of supply chain under senior roles in supply chain MNCs under her belt, and focusing on compliance as well. So both Martin and as you can see, both Martin and Maureen, they are global trade compliance experts with a lot of experience in simplifying complex regulations into practical business solutions so as to help business stay compliant while driving growth. So without further ado, if you have any questions for them, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can have them answered later on towards the end. So over to you, Maureen and Martin.
Thanks for that, Yvonne. Yeah, I'm here actually with two hats on, and the other hat is I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Hurricane Modular Commerce. We're a tech company that provides data solutions for global trade, which in turn enables efficient and compliant customs clearance around the world. We currently support just over 190 countries and have global customers, including just over 35 of the major postal authorities, freight forwarders, marketplaces, and we're even working with a couple of customs authorities in Europe now. As Yvonne said, I spent all my life in this industry. I got in by accident, but once you're in, you stay in, and there's no escape. But it's been an amazing journey, and I think what is key is it's so dynamic, and it always has been dynamic. I'll be presenting this section of the webinar with my friend and colleague Maureen Cori. Maureen, would you just like to say a few words about yourself and a little bit more detail about your background?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, so I am a licensed customs broker here in the United States, and I've been a broker probably for over 25 years. My background started probably pretty much with the DHL Express industry, having many roles, and working also with other express industries and with export controls as well as imports globally. So not just US focused, but all around the world. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here today and thanking everyone from TAPA for the invite.
Thanks, Maureen. If we can go on to the next slide. Coincidentally, today is the end or the start of the first 100 days of the new US presidency. There was a term started to come into our trade a few years back, disruptors. and it became a very sort of hot item. Everybody was talking about, disrupting the normal way of doing business. And I think what we've seen in not just the last 100 days, but literally since 2018, we've seen major disruption and the intent for further disruption. But we look around the world, and it's not just been about imports and exports of physical commodities, but there's been a huge impact on oil and gas coming in, the pricing on that. But it's been particularly a major impact on the physical commodities that are moving around the world. I guess the thing that sticks out to me most, people that are involved in international trade compliance, it has been traditionally quite a staid industry sector. You'd have a couple of months, people would talk about these changes before implementation was decided upon. Systems would be amended and changed. This has all changed since January, and these things are happening very quickly. And in some cases, as we'll touch on through the various presentations, we've seen decisions being made and decisions being reversed in less than 24 hours. And I think it sets a little bit of the tone of things to come. If we can go on to the next slide. There's a couple of things that I just want to briefly talk about that are really hot in the press and trade at this moment in time. One of the big things that happened right at the start of the new presidency was we heard that de minimis was going to be removed in the USA. But what is de minimis? De minimis is really a principle that the law does not or should not concern itself with trifles. The basic principle of that is that it shouldn't cost $1 to collect 50 cents. And that's been the principle, I think, since 1930, when de minimis was first introduced, oddly enough, in the USA, that as a trade facilitator, if it's going to cost you more than you're actually generating revenue, then it doesn't make a lot of sense of putting a lot of effort into managing that. It allows the importation of goods below a certain value threshold into a country without customs duties or taxes. The tax element, the VAT, the sales tax element, has been changing quite recently. Since about 2018, we've seen countries such as Australia, the European Union, the United Kingdom, they've all removed the VAT, the sales tax element from the de minimis, and we can expect more of that to come. This is one of the big things. In a couple of days' time, we believe that the de minimis is going to be removed for shipments coming from China, but also shipments with Chinese origin coming from other countries as well. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Tariffs. What are tariffs? I mean, basically, tariffs is a government tax or a duty applied to goods on importation into another country. As we've seen with a lot of what President Trump has actually said, that there are a number of reasons behind that. Number one is protection of industries. You don't want your country, domestic market, being flooded with cheap products from other countries. It's a revenue generator. Obviously, this is a tax on import, and they use the tariff, the duty rate, to actually ensure that it's not unduly, a commodity is not unduly cheaper to import than it is to purchase on the domestic marketplace. Since these changes, various CBP, Customs and Border Protection in the USA reports have indicated that approximately $200 million a day in extra revenue is being generated. And of course, it's also a facilitator to help balance trade. If we can go on to the next slide, please. On Liberation Day, 2nd of April, sitting in the Rose Garden of the White House, President Trump announced a whole range of major tariff hikes for countries around the world. And it was a reciprocal intent. And I think it's important just to take a breather and look at these. And when it all started, it wasn't China that was necessarily the direct focus of the visible implications of these tax hikes. There were a lot of countries in the region that actually had higher duty hikes than actually China itself. Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, just to mention a couple there, were all considerably higher than China. But we've seen all this change over the recent days and weeks. We've seen holds, we've seen starts, we've seen increases happen. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll pass over to Maureen to take the next few slides.
Hi, thank you. I want to go into a little bit of understanding IEEPA. IEEPA tariffs are a term that you may be hearing, and it's an acronym that's used in regards to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And this basically grants extraordinary situations the authority by government, the president, to make changes due to a national emergency. So this happened back in April, where President Trump, for the very first time, implemented this new IEEPA tariffs. I think it's important to also to understand that within these IEEPA tariffs, there are several challenges that are going on by state. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this will give you a little bit of an overview of the framework. The National Emergencies Act is an act that really gives the president the authority to claim national emergencies. So that's really your first layer in order to do the IEEPA powers, right? So that was put into place, IEEPA was put into place based off of the National Emergencies Act. Now, this is kind of unprecedented, but yet back in 1971, President Nixon used something similar. He used the Trading with the Enemies Act to put a 10% tariff across the board. So this was used in a different regulation, but it is something that did happen in the past. And currently we're seeing a lot of challenges with, I believe it's 12 states that are in the courts to fight the IEEPA approach, and that this is still underway. We should hear something shortly in the next few weeks on what's going on with the courts in the 12 states. If you can go to the next slide. Okay, I'm going to bring up a little bit about the harmonized schedule, which is the WCO's framework that's used globally up to the 6 digits. And this Chapter 8, 98, and 99 are used globally. They are special chapters that bring in different nuances and attributes. If you can go to the next slide. So here are some of the key differences. So Chapter 98 chapter is used for certain circumstances, such as like U.S. goods being returned, goods for religious beliefs, or articles for handicapped. So those are chapters that are in place, and they're provisions that never really change, or they're added or adapted. Chapter 99, that is where we're going to see a lot of these IEEPA tariffs and other tariffs, punitive rates, I'll call them, being used under the Chapter 99. And that's a temporary modification that brings in all the different sections, like such as the Section 301s for China, or FTAs, for example. And it gives you details, and it also captures other areas as far as the exemptions and so on. If you can go to the next slide. So this is important to understand what stacking looks like. So tariff stacking is a new term that brings in all the different areas on your importation that may fall underneath some of these criteria. What you're looking at now is just a snippet of what is known as the Customs Declaration 7501, where you have the description of the goods at the bottom, it'll tell you that these are household articles under 7323. It'll show you there circled 3.9%. Now, with the additional reciprocal trade with other steel derivatives, you'll see the different Chapter 99s added, which will give you the details under which the household products are impacted on. And this is called stacking because it may not necessarily be one particular Chapter 99 that's impacted on this particular product. It could be multiple. I also want to emphasize here too, anti-dumping and countervailing duties. I'm sure some of the folks in the audience may have goods that fall underneath this. This still applies. So this would be also stacked within these descriptions and in line items, and the duties appropriated would go into that as well. So that kind of gives you a visual of what tariff stacking looks like. If we could go to the next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about the time frame here. If we talk about Trump 1.0, we know back in his first term, he did Section 301s and a few other sections, and those still stayed in effect for the past 7 years, right? So when Biden was in office, he did not remove those, so they did stay in place. So I'm assuming we will see more of these tariffs remaining. To what degree? It's so fluid. And this time chart, again, is a timeline that's constantly changing. If we go to the next slide. So if we talk about the beginning of his second term, he had on day one, the America First executive order, which triggered all of this trade related changes. So he announced on February 1st, the first elimination of de minimis for import goods coming from China. This was a major shift. All of this is unprecedented, so it was a global, obviously, issue. Then on the later on the 4th, there was an additional 10% on goods from China and Hong Kong. Now, when these went into effect with the de minimis, it didn't flow as well as it should have. There was a lot of postal issues. There was clearance issues, backlog, and custom systems issues. So then on the 5th, they rolled back the de minimis. So that stayed in place. So any goods coming in were still eligible for de minimis clearance. So if we go to the next slide, please. Then we have March, we had additional tariffs going to 20%. The aluminum steel came into place, and then the industry impacts were significant to all these manufacturers and companies. So it was relevant that things were not working as well as planned, and certain conversations were going on within industry. Can you go to the next slide? So then we come to Liberation Day, which was April 2nd, where the tariffs went into play with 34% on those reciprocal tariffs. Moving on to later on, additional 25% was put onto the automotive and car industries, which there's a lot of discussion around, obviously. And then on the 5th of April, additional baseline 10% reciprocal went in on certain countries with the exception of China. If you can go to the next slide. And just basically an overview, everything kind of went off the charts, starting with a dramatic increase of 84% for China, then to 25%, 45%. And then there was a pause on the reciprocal trade for 90 days. I think there's 72 days now left, if I'm not mistaken. Can we go to the next slide? And then basically, from an implementation phase, I think from here, the biggest key is Friday, where they're going to go back and roll out the de minimis elimination for China and Hong Kong. And these will be changes across the board between postal and general freight. That will happen on Friday. If there's no hiccups, that's the deadline. So I think there's so much impact to the supply chain, and the impacts just, from an economic standpoint as well as implementation has been dramatic. We go to the next slide.
Okay, I'll take it from
Over to
for the
you.
next few slides. Obviously, this is not a one-way activity as such, and many countries have been preparing retaliatory actions to defend themselves from this wave of tariff increases and various other regulatory controls. If we can go to the next slide, please. China is obviously the one that's captured most of the news attention over the last weeks. And so far, we know that they've gone to the WTO, raised a number of complaints about violation of trade principles. They've taken domestic economic measures, monetary easing, and increased business support. There's been basically a denied parties list of companies and individuals in China now for a few years. And we've seen over the last couple of months or so that more and more US companies have been added to that list. Rare earth minerals, I think that's got an awful lot of attention, particularly with Tesla and the development of batteries. And there's been various other tariffs applied on products into China. If we can go to the next slide. It's not only China. A lot of other countries have prepared a defense case, for want of a better description. The European Union, for example, published their retaliatory tariffs and the commodities that they'd apply on. And that was published one day, and the next day it was suspended. But it was suspended as a reaction to something that happened within the USA and the seizing of some of these reciprocal actions as such. But there's a lot of countries that have been planning this directly and indirectly, and some countries have planned directly in line with tariff, basically punitive tariff actions and sort of controls on certain commodities, and other have taken other fiscal actions to demonstrate their dissatisfaction with what's going on at this moment in time. I think back to you now, Maureen, for the next slide, please. You're on mute.
Sorry. Understanding the country of origin rules, I think are really critical when it comes to trade in general, understanding the duties associated based on origin and the compliance measures that need to be in place for when you're shipping, your documentation, and understanding any free trade agreement that you have in relation to the origin of goods, and proper labeling are critical. Next slide. Yeah, so I think understanding whether the goods are wholly made in one country, whether there's some substantial transformation in another country, is really quite a very, very big difference. And then without the processing in transit, we'll talk about transshipments and understanding those on the next slide. Sorry, or next slide after that. Understanding too the financial impacts. This is just not from your tariffs, but also from your compliance levels. To avoid duties and taxes and circumventing could lead to issues of seizures and fines and penalties. So I think from the long term, this isn't going away. We'll all have tariffs, and each country will implement their own procedures and processes when it comes to fines and penalties. So understand what your declarations require, and data is key, making sure you have your harmonized tariffs up to date. Do you have a database? Do you have technology to support it, etc.? Next slide. I think this is over to you, Martin.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we'll go through these very quickly because time is running against us. It goes without saying we can expect supply chain disruption. We've already seen stories of aircraft being stood down, deep sea traffic being impacted, etc. If we can go to the next slide. Yeah, I'm not going to hang around with this because I think we've touched on it. Next slide, please. Yeah, so some of the biggest issues, and I've actually been talking to some hedge funds and investment people about this. One of the challenges we've got is demand forecasting. Yeah, everything that we've planned upon in the past is now going to be different. Routes are going to be different. The history of trade is going to have less value. We can expect cost implications because of that, and we can also expect perhaps some delays in the supply chain with the shift from air freight into deep sea and sea freight for the time being. Maureen, if you'd like to quickly cover the last couple of slides, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. If you can hit that, yeah. Yeah, so just basically from your export control side, making sure, again, that you understand how to navigate these regulations and avoid the costly impacts of penalties. Next slide. So some important compliance checks that you may want to consider and put in place if you don't have it already is understanding your product classification if you have a database. If you don't have a database, do you have AI technology to support it? It is critical to have good data. If you don't have good data from the start to the finish, you're more likely to have delays. You're more likely to have potential holds at the ports, examinations, etc. Partner screening, understand who you're doing business with within the supply chain. And this goes from cradle to grave. You need to understand the routing, the payment processes, etc. The origin validation, understanding your origins is critical. When you're transshipping and you're changing goods, you need to ensure you understand what type of transformation that may be that may impact the origin of the goods. And your accuracy on your invoice, it is critical to not undervalue your goods, to follow the proper goods for your, the proper evaluation, whether it's, I'm just trying to think of different invoice values, but do not undervalue your goods to circumvent duties and payments. Next slide. So this is just totally unprecedented. The impacts are such a global scale that it's just not about the US, it's about the whole world. And we need to look at the supply chain disruptions and your routing and where you're doing business and looking at it holistically, not panicking, not overreacting, because that'll cost more than looking at things holistically. E-commerce impact will be very big in the coming days, potentially into the US and globally because of the changes that are underway. Next slide. So here, just to give a final overview from compliance strategies, I think, obviously monitoring the changes can be challenging because there's a lot of bad information out there. So be sure you understand where you're getting your information from, keeping up to date, reviewing your supply chain constantly. I think it's just an ongoing responsibility to do that, and calculating the total impact. Also developing contingency plans. We've seen this with COVID. There were no contingency plans. One thing that I will stress is understanding the tone from the top. If the tone from the top is not there, it doesn't trickle down throughout the organization. So understand red flags within your business. do some back office audits and checks because U.S. Customs is auditing. So they've already recovered a lot of money through this process, and it will continue. Screening your partners is critical. So if you're not doing denied party screening, you need to consider that. And from a tech standpoint, understanding what kind of technology you need if you don't have any, or if you need to look at what will be more efficient in the future. So that's pretty much, I think, it on that one. Over to you, Martin.
I think just 4 points to note very, very quickly. Latest news. This is so volatile and changes so quickly. Make sure that you've got the right news, or you've got the right partners to ensure that you're getting the right information. Comply. There is no shortcuts. COO, I know Douglas will talk a bit more about that in a few moments. And also valuation. Absolutely key. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Maureen and Martin. So, very, very interesting sharing. A lot of information, giving us a baseline of all the U.S. regulations, and of course, wonderful sharing of what has happened for the past 100 days, and also a little bit of insight to what is currently going to happen, happening, and going to happen. And I also think some of the key points that has been shared by them is, I think that the impacts is quite clear for all to see, and appreciate the points on the checkpoints and aspects that we need to take care of, like your product classification, country of origin, which I think we keep hearing that again and again. But then so now with that setting of the part one, let's move on to have that sharing with Douglas Mackay. He is a seasoned trade and custom advisor with over 40 years of experience across diverse industries. And for the past 18 years, he has been based in China and working with a US MNC. Yeah. So without further ado, I'll pass the stage over to you, Douglas.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Just briefly, as you said, I've been in Asia for the past 18 years. I now contract with the Big Four, so I'm no longer in the private sector, but I have worked in almost all of the countries in Asia Pacific, from India, Malaysia, Thailand, you name them. I've worked across all of that. So in this session, I'm briefly going to discuss risk and short-term strategies and give some examples. We've already mentioned this, but across the market, we can see aggressive and questionable tactics being proposed, particularly transshipment through third countries. There's these fly-by-night companies on the internet that are offering all these fantastic services that they will repackage and relabel your goods so that it will get the new country of origin designation. They're offering you, double invoicing. And these all pose significant compliance risks, especially, as enforcement actions ramp up. Next slide, please. And yeah, I'll just quickly set the stage. I'll just briefly examine the recent enforcement trends, which provide a clear indication of what exporters in the region can anticipate going forward. So as we can see, certain sectors are already under CBP radar for forced labor inspections, and this will easily be extended to origin. So, we have our textiles, we have industrial, base metals, pharmaceutical. All of these products are currently being inspected for forced labor rules. So next step is the origin criteria will be inputted. As we can see, under the forced labor, obviously most of it is from China, but a lot of it, attention is drawing focus now on Asian countries, Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia. And then very briefly, if we look at the order trends, there's been a marked increase from February from, let's say, $3 million to $310 million in March. So this is a trend, and it's a clear indication of what we can expect going ahead. One of the big things that exporters and their customers need to be aware of is the US False Claims Act. And we can basically call that a sort of a whistleblower's tool, as most of the cases acted upon are from within the company's own employees or disgruntled ex-employees. And they stand to gain millions from any penalties that are imposed. Penalties imposed under the False Claims Act are, they range into hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's not been known, some of these whistleblowers have got up to $20 million as rewards. So you need to be aware of employees in that have sensitive information for you, they can become whistleblowers. Just also on the subject, we've also noticed that recently Vietnamese authorities have tightened their origin rules and customs inspections, and this we'll most probably see across the other countries too. They're all doing this to offer reciprocal items to Trump to show that they are working on this. Now what I'm going to do is I will shift to two core trade principles: origin determination and valuation. These are primary mechanisms through which companies seek to lower landed costs in the short term. So correctly applying the country of origin rules and leveraging legal avenues to reduce valuation can be effective strategies when managed appropriately. Next slide, please. I noticed early on in the questions, a lot of people seem to be a little bit confused about the rules of origin. They may not be 100% sure on that. So basically, the rules of origin are a WTO agreement. Article 9 basically states that the principles for the wholly obtained and the last substantial transformation. Now, in ASEAN, what we'll find is that not many countries in ASEAN have officially notified the WTO of their non-preferential rules. The US has notified the WTO. You can go to the WTO website and you'll find their notification there. But what we have seen in ASEAN, their rules, their substantial transformation rules tend to be change in tariff basic classification or ad valorem percentage or a specific manufacturing, which this is, it's a bit different applied in the US. Right, so the US applies a substantial transformation in a completely different light. And next slide, and we'll look at it quickly. We're running out of time here. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the substantial transformation, given the interconnected nature of modern trade, products often incorporate materials from multiple sources, with processing occurring across different regions, and these raise significant concerns regarding country of origin designation for goods entering the US. I've noticed many companies in Asia default to non-preferential origin rules based on the country of export, so Thailand, Singapore, etc. However, this may not align with US regulations, where country of origin is determined by substantial transformation. So as a result, you could have a product, for example, labeled made in Singapore, but may still be classified as a Chinese origin product under US rules, triggering China-specific tariffs, and a major compliance risk for both exporters and US importers. You'll see in the slide there we say, and I think most of you have heard this, that the substantial transformation rules in the US are based on a name, character, or use. Again, country of origin is determined by the country in which the last substantial transformation occurred prior to entry into the United States, and duties are applied based on country of origin, not country of exportation. That is very important to remember. That is where the transformation takes place. To illustrate that, the complexities, let me just walk you through quick two case studies. Next slide, please. So here we have a heat gun and assembled in Thailand. So what we have is we have material sourced from China, and most manufacturers in ASEAN will source a certain amount of material from China, or vice versa. They will send material to China for further processing and then exportation to the US. So here we have source from China. We have the PCBA, motor fan, switch, power cord, etc. It's shipped to Thailand, where the main housing, the front cover, and heating element are produced in Thailand. Final assembly consists of press fitting, crimping, soldering, fastening, assembling, testing, labeling, and packaging. Now, a heat gun is classified in the HTS under 8419. So basically what we can say, if we look at it, we'll say, if we look at the components here, we'll say, right, there is a shift in classification, in heading. That would appear from most of the products there. And also, if we look at it, we would tend to look at it and we'll say, right, the heating element, that could be what gives us the essential character of the product. So we'll say, right, this is made in Thailand. Okay? But substantial transformation rules are not so straightforward. They need a very deep dive study of the whole manufacturing process, the supply chain process. And if we look at, next slide, please. Okay, so what we had here is, this is an actual ruling from CBP. So CBP found that the final assembly operations in Thailand are not sufficiently complex as to constitute a substantial transformation. So CBP had looked at the nature of the assembly as well as the origin of the components that imparts the essence to the end product, and they determined the country of origin is China. So although the exporter in Thailand, he applied the non-preferential rules as applicable in China, a shift in tariff heading, maybe an added value percentage, and maybe you got a certificate of origin from DFT to say, right, this is a country of origin Thailand. But it is not according to substantial transformation origin rules of the US. So in this instance, you have a product here that is made in Thailand, but a product of China, and it is still subject to the China Section 301 and China reciprocal tariffs in it. So you can see how important it is to understand your supply chain and understand your manufacturing process and the name change and use criterion that CBP uses. Next slide, please. Let's have a look at another one. So now we're looking at assembling China, faucets. So we have a faucet valve, the cartridges are manufactured in Vietnam and then shipped to China, where two handles, a deck plate, base plate, and spouse assembly will be manufactured in China. The final assembly will begin by press fitting the diverter into the Chinese raceway of the Vietnamese valve assembly. And it's a lot to go on there, but basically the two handle assemblies will then be press fitted over the Vietnamese cartridge valves, and the handle hubs will be screwed to the hand adapters. So again, where is the origin? Is it in Vietnam or is the origin China? Subject to the 301. Next, please. And yeah, in this case, CB found that the valve bodies impart more of the essence of the finished faucet. So they found the country of origin of the faucets, in this case, to be Vietnam. So yeah, we have a case of Asian countries doing the final assembly in China and not having to pay the Section 301 or the China reciprocal tariffs because the origin is determined as Vietnam. So you can see it can go either way. But again, these rules are very subjective. Very subjective. It requires very careful analysis before you can just go say, oh, okay, my product is a product of Vietnam or Taiwan or Japan or that. We know many companies assemble in China. Not many of them have looked at it to see if they could change their origin. This is something to be considered, or vice versa, as in the first slide, they might be using the Asian non-preferential rules and not aware of the risk that they are placing on the goods. Whoops, and we're running out of time. Next slide. Okay, just quickly on the valuation. One of the most popular ones is a first sale for export, not commonly used in Asia because it's always typically been used for sales out of China and through the middleman in Hong Kong. But now with the reciprocal tariffs and the coming on, we will see more Asian countries looking at these ways to legally reduce their value. But again, there is a lot of devil in the details in it. This is a very simple implication, image of it that just shows you basically the first sale is basically the sale between the manufacturer in China and the intermediary. So the last sale, which obviously doesn't apply in Asian countries. Asian countries use the last sale or the second sale for valuation purposes. Basically, only the US that uses a first sale principle. But if you basically look at it, you can see what the savings would be if you use the first sale versus the second sale. But again, as I said, a lot of it goes into it, and you need to be very careful when you use it. There are three conditions that must be met. There must be a bona fide sale of the goods by the manufacturer to the intermediary. The sales must be at arm's length, and the goods must be clearly destined for the US. And as I said, the first sale for export is something we can do a seminar on by itself. The same with country of origin can be a seminar by itself. Very complicated. Very quickly, the last slide. Okay. What we have seen here is we have the first sale for a non-resident importer. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. We run out of time. It's basically the same as the first sale. The only difference is the middleman is actually a non-resident importer in the US. Now, normally in a setup like that, you would say there is no sale. You cannot sell the goods to yourself. And normally CBP would value the goods on the final sale to your US consumer. But there is ways around it that you can still use the first sale. But again, as I said, the devil is in the details. It needs, again, a review of all the documentation, all the processes, payment processes, everything, every I must be dotted, every T must be crossed. So and we don't have time to go into that, but I just want to highlight what we've noticed. Attention from Asian suppliers is looking at the first sale for NRI. And that is me, and we've run out of time, so hopefully we might still have time for Q&A. I'm not sure of that. Yeah,
yes, Douglas, we will still have time for Q&A, not to worry. And then this is also Douglas, communication, his email. So feel free to reach out to him also, and also connect on LinkedIn. But also, Douglas, is there anything else that you will also like to add in, because I know COO is such a big topic by itself, but yeah.
Well, basically, as I said, what we need to look at now is we're looking at short-term strategies, because long-term strategies, you can't move a factory overnight or something. That is long-term planning. So yeah, we're not going to look at long-term planning. We're looking at short-term. And as I said, short-term, we basically look around the origin of the goods. We look at the valuation, the first sale for export. We look at unbundling activities. What can we unbundle legally from the value? As we know, I think most people know that the US is on a FOB basis, so you don't pay duty on your freight. So these are different things that you have to look at, and also the incidental charges to freight. Under a lot of circumstances in the US, they can also be deducted. So there are ways of looking at that, but those are the common things to look at. Classification, we can still look at, but because of the flat rate of 10% or 25%, it's difficult. What we need to look at, for example, is, are your goods correctly classified so that you can make use of the exemptions in Annex 2, or are your goods correctly classified that they won't be caught as a vehicle part or a component in that, which from May will be subject to the 25% duty. So again, correct classification of your goods, correct valuation of your goods, and origin. Those are the three key principles.
A good point on that, Douglas. So I think Audra also has now we move on to a bit of the answer some of the questions. Also before this webinar, we also have sent out a question link whereby members are encouraged to put in any questions they would like to ask, any burning things that they would like to find out. So I think also in this chat, Audra, you are around. Maybe you want to say hi. Audra has put inside the chat a question. So has anyone been approached by their customers or China Customs seeking for COO of the raw materials, if it's US, when finished products have been shipped into China? So maybe
yes,
Douglas,
that has been happened, especially for companies that ship from Mexico or Puerto Rico, and I'll touch on the Puerto Rico one now, because in Mexico it's not common to get a certificate of origin because it is self-certification there, especially under the USCMEA. So it's not common to go to the Chamber of Commerce or that and get a certificate of origin. We are doing some inquiry follow-up of that to finish on that. And then Puerto Rico, although Puerto Rico is a de facto state of the US and applies the same US rules, etc., and that, for China purposes, they do not apply reciprocal tariffs against Puerto Rico. So there are people that manufacture in Puerto Rico, and they have a lower rate of duty. The problem is the Puerto Rico certificate of origin says Puerto Rico, USA. And if you present that to China Customs, they're going to say, sorry, that is USA, you have to pay the USA rates of duty. So again, there we're in discussions with the Chamber of Commerce in Puerto Rico to see under what circumstances they can take the USA off the certificate of origin. But in China, obviously you're going to see that any goods that are shipped from the States or any place adjacent to the States, they will be looked at and they will request a certificate of origin, especially if you're not paying the reciprocal duties. For example, if it's shipped from, let's say, New York, and you say, right, no, these tariffs are not applicable, they will want to see a certificate of origin. And it will have to be an original. It can't be a copy or anything like that.
Audrey, your mute has been your mic has been unmuted. So just maybe let us know which industry are you from?
Hi, I'm actually from the semicon. So shipment actually was manufactured in Singapore and then shipping into China. So that was the question. I'm curious if anyone has the experience or been approached.
Because semiconductors, a lot of that because of the foreign direct rules, etc., and that a lot of times the origin remains the US, even though it's assembled, for example, in Singapore. Again, you have to look at the rules of origin. Just because you do assembly in Singapore, as I said earlier, doesn't mean that the country of origin is Singapore. You basically have to look at where the wafer, etc., is. What is the origin of the wafer? Normally, semiconductors, the origin is based on the wafer. Not always, but normally that could be the case. So these will be looked at, But again, unofficially in China, semiconductors are exempt from tariffs. There is a list of about 131 products that have currently been exempted from US reciprocal tariffs. The only thing is it was published and then it was taken down. So it's not there. It's only when you go make your declaration and you get your documents back, you'll see, all of a sudden it's free of duty. So semiconductor industry, I don't know if all of the semiconductors, but I think mainly the 8541, 8542 products are currently exempted in China. But again, there's no official, you can't go to the GAC website and find an official announcement about that. I think they're trying to play games with the US, etc. and that. So, but it is there. I on my WeChat, I've got different WeChat groups that I follow in China for supply chain and trade and customs professionals and that. And this is a hot topic as to is an exemption there or is an exemption not there. Also, pharmaceuticals are also apparently on this exemption list.
Thank you, Douglas. Audra, I hope that helps to clarify a little bit.
Yes, it does.
And
Thank
again,
you.
that question that's been raised there, this goes back to what we had early on where, freight forwarders, a number of brokers were offering to produce a new COO. You need to be very careful of that. Simple repackaging of goods, something comes from China and you take it out of the box and you put it into another box. It says nice label there that says made in Malaysia or whatever, but the actual products inside the box are still stamped made in China, whatever. That is fraud. And you shouldn't get involved in anything like that. The end consumer in the US will be fined will be all the way, and the supplier is going to land up with a reputational damage if US doesn't try and impose penalties on him as well.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize too on that if you're being asked to do something like that, just like Douglas mentioned, to stay away from any type of issues that could potentially put your business at risk. Customs is doing audits and identifying these areas in which this is happening. So from a brand reputation as well as potential loss of imports into the US, it's to me devastating to a potential business. But then understanding transformation is different. So transships are very different, and just caution everyone, if anyone's asking you to change a documentation, that should not be your responsibility. That is not something you should own and not something that you should be involved in.
And what you have to realize here too is that
you've got a situation whereby we know that CBP, Customs and Border Protection, they're actively recruiting additional auditors. So this for them is self-funding. And I think
Correct.
one of the biggest things that I'm seeing is that there's been a lot of talk about enforcement over the past years with little visual sort of sight of enforcement. This is different. This is going to be enforced. No matter what happens at the end of the day, this is going to be enforced, and they will look aggressively for non-compliant traders.
Mm-hmm. And that ties in with the question that Tony has helped to share on the point whereby, we are seeing a growing number of brokers offering to produce new COO for manufacturers. So we see that from the demographics survey earlier on, there were a lot of brand owners and manufacturers here. So for forwarders, when they are approached by brokers and or manufacturers to do that, so in your opinion, maybe Martin, the best answer, the best advice for them would be to
Step away, stay away.
Yeah, don't do it.
Run away, not stay away, run away. But I think Maureen and Douglas both mentioned, know who you're doing business with. Just because somebody comes along has got a great account and lots of volume doesn't mean it's business that you want to take on board. So you really do your due diligence, know your customer, and understand what the requirements are. And it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. But
Well,
you shouldn't just look at the negativity of all this.
Yeah.
Doing it
I mean,
right
the
is
key,
a great opportunity.
and I think
the key
educating your
things-
ground
oh,
level, sorry, understand,
No, go ahead.
educating the ground workers that are doing the job day to day is critical so that they understand a red flag. So sometimes these things happen because they think they're doing the right thing, but they don't know what's the right from the wrong. So this goes back to your back office, where are your gaps, looking for red flags, sharing that information, because it can easily happen, especially if it's a regular account and you have great revenue from this company. They may think this is the right thing to do. So escalate.
As I said, the key thing here is always to make sure you do this yourself. Make sure you understand your substantial transformation according to CBP rules and not the non-preferential rules. For example, Malaysia, if I remember correctly, Malaysia only requires a 25% added value for non-preferential origin rules and a simple change in tariff heading. That will not meet the requirements of CBP. So make sure you do your own substantial transformation analysis, or a professional, seasoned professional to do it for you. And they can also help you then to apply for a US ruling for that to make sure you are covered. But don't let some fly-by-night person come and say, look, we can change the origin for you. We can give you a certificate of origin or whatever the case is. It's not going to happen. I think, Maureen, this will be one for you about the de minimis.
Yes. So de minimis is actually happening for the postal side on Friday. So are they ready? Well, time will tell. It's been a challenge for the post office. The post office doesn't have the same technology that brokers have, freight forwarders have, customs has. So on the customs side, within the postal side, it's very different. There are flat rates and other rates that they're going to be requiring the carriers to collect the duties and taxes up front. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of lobbying against that because there was a big issue when it first started on how to collect, how to process, because in the postal world, they cannot do low value shipments. It's either formal entry or de minimis. So it's a challenge. We will see what will happen in the coming days. It's hard to predict, but it didn't go well the first round. I'm sure they're going to have a lot of challenges this round, but only time will tell.
And I think just adding to that, Maureen, it really is in the supply chain as well. And the technology, I mean, literally a couple of days ago, it was an Excel spreadsheet that had been sent out to collect some of the information. So it's going to be hard. And
it's going to be hard on brokers too, because the last rounds with the brokers for the de minimis, keep in mind that you have an importer of record who's responsible for duties and taxes. So when it comes to low value goods, you still need to have that clearance with a bond and somebody responsible for paying duties for e-commerce goods that are, thousands and thousands of shipments in one consolidation, whereas they were not equipped to pay for the duties and taxes. No one was collecting them up front. Brokers went out of business, small brokers, because they were never recouped the money. So that kind of put a kibosh at the very beginning also, because they needed to come up with a method. So now everything systems-wise are apparently in place. ACE is supposed to be able to handle it. ACE is the custom system and the platform in which the goods are transmitted. So apparently it's a go. I'm sure if there's any hiccups, we'll hear about it pretty quickly.
So am I right to say that, Maureen, we should anticipate more delays for inbound shipments?
Absolutely, potentially.
Okay, so that's it. So people who are doing
it goes back to the data. It goes back to the data, right? If you have poor data, which I can guarantee you, 80% of the shipments that come in, the data is terrible. It's absolutely atrocious. So if you're sending bad data, expect delays. Expect your goods to sit there. If you're not doing your proper screening too, expect it to sit there. The goods that are coming in now into the JFK, I'll use that as an example. They created a examination station for low value goods. The increase in drugs, fentanyl, IPR, precursors have skyrocketed since January when they opened it. So now they have more data to figure out where these issues are happening. So if you have bad data and you don't have a harmonized number and you don't have the product associated to that number, meaning if you put it, just slap on bicycles as a description, but you have a harmonized tariff number for books, it's a mismatch. They're going to catch it. It's going to cause delays. So if you don't have your ducks in a row, as they say, it's going to cause delays.
So proper documentation and also make sure your data is captured properly. There's also a lot of due diligence work to make sure that your data is accurate. So
Yes.
all these has to be in place so that you're to try to minimize all the efforts needs to be put in to minimize the delays and impact with forecoming complexity in the supply chain, right? So you want your things to go out fast. So I think that is a good point. And last but not least, I think we have also a lot of questions from our survey that a lot of members are very interested to know. In your opinion, which industries will see the biggest impact from the new tariff policies in 2022 in this year? So maybe I'll go around the table. Your opinion?
Well,
Or
I think
your
what we have
insight, if you
to,
have
I think what we have to
insight.
look at for is the sectorial tariffs. There's a lot of products now. For example, everything that's been put into Annex 2. I think a lot of the products that are currently in Annex 2 will eventually fall under sectorial tariffs, i.e., and then we're most probably looking at 25%. So the semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, wood, what else? Copper. All these products are currently under investigation. And once investigation is complete, I think the feeling in the industry is that some form of sectorial tariffs will be implemented. So that is the next risk on that people should be aware of, and it should be on their radar.
Yeah, I think from my side, I think de minimis, the volumes into the U.S. are the highest. So from a processing impact cost, I think that will be interesting to see. And, you know, I think there's so much negotiation still going on that it's really kind of unknown, the future in that respect. I do believe the sectorial, after April 30th, all of the information and reporting is supposed to be back on that. I think that'll be interesting. But it's, to me at the moment, it's de minimis. That's going to have the biggest impact volume-wise. The auto industry obviously will be impacted greatly. Steel, it's across the board. It's very hard to target and pigeonhole one particular impact, because really the impact is based on the organizations that are getting impacted, right? So it could be a big impact to one industry versus another. So what happens to you, I think, is the biggest impact, right? And to focus on it.
I think just adding on that, I was going to comment on de minimis as well. Yeah, nearly 1.5 billion de minimis shipments into the USA last year, about 62% originated from China, and it's the whole process. Once you start backing that up, you're going to have facilities filling up with consignments that have been seized or held for whatever reasons, and not just for de minimis. It could be totally legitimate as far as data is concerned, but if it's not compliant, it's an IPR infringement or whatever else, these are going to back up. So it's the consequential impacts of de minimis, which may not impact too greatly the B2B people or clients out there, but the incremental, the consequential impacts of de minimis is going to be huge, and there isn't necessarily an easy answer to that.
No, and I think the biggest impact probably is to small, medium-sized industries, because they don't have the knowledge, education. There's not enough working groups for them. And I am going to be on one with Customs at the Trade Symposium, the Trade and Security Summit coming up in next week, actually. And it's going to focus on small, medium-sized enterprises, because honestly, they're going to be the biggest impact, I think, from all of it.
But one point that I just want to add on here is that suppliers or manufacturers, suppliers in Asia must start taking the initiative. They mustn't wait for their customers in the US to approach them and say, look, have you looked at your origin? Have you looked at, we want you to consider first, so we want you to do this. Take the initiative so you can go and you can open the negotiation and the bargaining. You can hold the cards in your hand. You go to them and say, right, we've explored this. We can do this. We've looked at our origin. We can provide this. Help with us, maybe in conjunction, apply for rules of origin, etc. But suppliers mustn't wait for their customers to approach them. They must take more active approach.
Yeah, more strategic planning for sure.
But I think, coming from the express industry, as I do, and Douglas and Maureen are both from the same sort of pedigree. The expectation of manufacturers and exporters that it's the responsibility of the freight forwarder to ensure compliance is totally wrong. You own the goods, you own the data, you own the responsibility. Don't trust anybody else in the supply chain to get it right other than yourselves.
Yeah. And you have to remember that CBP has a standard of reasonable care. So any importer that needs to make sure they take reasonable care, and just throwing up your hands up and say, oh, my freight forwarder did this or my broker did this, you're definitely not going to pass a reasonable care test.
Yeah, and going to reasonable care as a broker, the broker's responsible for due diligence and reasonable care. So if they turn your shipment away, or they won't be willing to clear it for obvious reasons or non-obvious reasons, they're held accountable too. So there's going to be an extreme level of critiquing things from a broker perspective, because they can lose their license. And like for myself, I would obviously, you make sure you know who you're doing business with.
Yep. Thank you for the sharing to the the answers from the three speakers. Also, one thing, just to wrap it up, the last one interesting question that we got was that, not particularly from the slide, but I'm just going to say it from the feedback form. With interest just now, when Martin, you showed the charts whereby all the tariffs they were ranked in order, and we can see that there are a lot of countries are actually APAC countries. So does that mean that APAC countries are going to be particularly vulnerable in time to come? And as such, right? And there's a lot of growing smaller companies in APAC, being a developing country, developing region, sorry. And so to build the necessary resilience into their supply chain, but yet they do not have the budget for that. So what are your thoughts about this, and what would your advice be?
Well, first of all, yes, countries in Southeast Asia are more likely to be targeted, and only because China is moving manufacturing to these countries. So, for example, Vietnam is high on the radar That's why they got such a high reciprocal rate. I think about 46% or something, followed by Malaysia at about 44%. Even Taiwan had an exceptional one. So what you have to look at is these countries in Asia that have big trade deficits with the US, they're going to be on the radar. Then other countries like Thailand is not so much there at the moment. Singapore got away with 10%. But the more Chinese countries start moving their manufacturing into these countries, the more scrutiny is going to be placed on them, and more onus is going to be on them to make sure they are compliant. As we keep on saying, do their due diligence, know your customer, know your client all the way through.
Yeah.
Understand your supply chain.
Yeah, Martin, Maureen, you have anything else to add?
Yeah, from my side as such is that there are a lot of other countries, in Africa, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. There's a lot of other countries that are sources of low cost, cheap production type environment. So there is a heavy focus there. The whole freezing of the tariffs for 90 days is great news. Plus, there was a dropping down of the tariff rate as well. We've really got on that side, I think it's till the 8th of July, Maureen, before the 90 days runs out.
Yeah, it's like 72 days left, I think. Yeah.
As such, so we'll be seeing a lot of things happen. I had a lot of hair in January, but it's all fallen out now. So yeah, watch this space, as they say. A lot more challenges to come.
Yeah. So
that last question there by Catherine, I would say, look, the countries in Asia or diversifying to Asia, that is still an option. That option is always going to be on the table. Whatever the tariff rates applied on the Asian countries after the discussions with Trump or that, whatever the final rates are going to be, if they go back to the normal rates or not go back, they will still be better than China. So Asian countries are still going to be a good market for diversifying your supply chains and diversifying your supply chains to enter the consumer market in Southeast Asia. Indonesia, massive population. So there is market and the growth is there in Southeast Asia. So you can market for Southeast Asia, for European markets, and obviously for US market. By following the rules that we said, make sure you understand your origin of the goods that you're getting. If you are moving to diversifying to supply the US, then you have to understand where your raw material and components are being sourced from. If you're still using Chinese components to manufacture, then you must understand substantial transformation rules. Otherwise, simply moving and setting up a new factory like the solar panel companies did. They moved to Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and what happened? The anti-dumping and countervailing duties are still applicable because it's still regarded as a produce of China. So don't diversify. If you diversify and you're still using China origin products, make sure you do your study correctly.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the. Oh, sorry, Maureen, you want to say something before?
No, I was just going to add just a point on to Douglas's on the diversifying. Obviously that a lot of that came out of COVID. Folks manufacturing, apparel, etc., diversified throughout because they wanted to make sure that they were able to bring to market. I think diversifying is a great thing because you're not putting all your eggs, I guess, in one basket, but don't diversify just to chase rainbows because we don't know what's going to happen. And it's very costly to create and move a manufacturing. So just be wise. All the things Douglas mentioned are key, but also just be wise about it. You determine what the needs are and why you want to diversify as well.
Yeah.
Understand your strategy for diversifying. If you're just diversifying because you want to evade tariffs, that's a very big risk.
Not a good,
especially if you're doing it for you.
We shouldn't be doing that. Yeah.
When you're talking about economic justification rules, it's something different.
Yeah, we shouldn't be doing that. But I think also rightly Maureen mentioned just now about the COVID during that period whereby, you know, a lot of disruptions happen. I think this is also something that is potentially may happen. So, as what Tony has always been advocating, and also what TAPA APAC has been advocating to our members, do a proper risk assessment, do your continuity plan, business continuity planning. So you have to do that. Yes, have to do that. Anybody who needs, you know, more, you know, some support on where to get your hands on RAS and BCP planning, you can reach out to the TAPA APAC team, and we'll be able to share our training programs with you on that. All right. And I think, Tony, have there anything else to add before we wrap up tonight or today?
So I just want to thank everybody for joining, but particularly I want to thank Maureen, Martin and Douglas. Done a great job. I think you've covered a lot of ground in this. It was meant to be an hour, we've gone over, but some great stuff. So thank you very much for that. And as Yvonne said, you know, please guys, reach out, learn how to do a risk assessment. You know, companies that use the TAPA standards have lower operational issues and, you know, those that don't. So reach out for help and support. And you have Maureen, Martin and Douglas's LinkedIn details there. So, you know, reach out to them and get in touch if you need help and support. So thank you very much.
I'm based in Asia, so it's easy to reach out to me.
All right. So we have one from Douglas is right now based in China still, Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and
Shanghai.
Shanghai, yes, and Maureen in so we have you in the US and the UK as well. So you have all the 3 regions covered, yeah. Right. And I think so last but not least, thank you so much for the audience's time to join us today for this webinar, and really, really appreciate the sharing from our speakers, Martin, Maureen, and Douglas, as well as Tony. And we'll also like to, if you would like to also appeal to the audience here to give us, to put in your feedback on what you think about today's webinar, because we would definitely love to do more, and also to see what other new topics that you would like to hear about. And so last but not least, reached out to TAPA APAC team and follow our socials for the next upcoming updates and events. And once again, I hope all of you have enjoyed today's session. Thank you very much. Have a good night, a good day, a good afternoon ahead, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.